Business day today, business day. If you guys are new here, my name is Trav. I'm an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is somewhat misfortunate because it's like this disease you have that you can't really get rid of, and it's just how your brain thinks. And it can be an advantage and it can be a super disadvantage. Contrast to someone who's a businessman, right? Businessman would not be an entrepreneur. Businessman would be someone who's like, very calculating, very risk averse. And that's not to say that entrepreneurs are not risk averse. I'd say they're the most risk averse, but their brain, the way that their brain thinks, it's very different from a businessman. Businessman and entrepreneur are not the same person. This is a good skill to have. It's a super good skill to have because I think that we're going there. I think that we're seeing there's been a book I read a few years ago called The End of Jobs, and Taylor nailed it. And he's basically jobs are going away. Long term, we're moving to an economy or a culture of independent IBOs, independent business owners, or independent contractors, or freelancers, or gig economy. But we're moving away from the 5,000 person, business. In addition to that, we've got this fake money coming around. This is a Donald J. Trump check right here. This is because I managed to pay less than $84,000 on my taxable income last year, so they sent me one of these $1,200. They actually sent this to my wife, $1,200. They sent me a $1,200, but it had my wife's name and my name on it, and my wife's like, cool, I got two of them. I'm like, well, it's fake funny money anyway. Conversation's timely because we are at the beginning of the fourth turning. And we are actually in the first phase of the fourth turning. There are 5 phases to the fourth turning. The thing is that there's also a generation that dies off as a generation is born. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm learning so much today. There's about 4 generations that are alive at the same time. And when you get to the fourth turning, you get to the end of a cycle. Typically, this is an 80-year cycle. Guess what? So is the monetary cycle. It's 80 years. And we're coming in 2025 to 2030. We'll be coming into the wrapping up of the fourth turning. But we're right now, coronavirus level 1. We're just at what's called the trigger. And so our trigger event has been the coronavirus or the Chinese virus. It's kind of a problem because it's China. If you were to historically test this, you went 80 years back from today, you would find yourself in 1940, which would be the entrance of the Americans into World War II. If you were to go 80 years beyond that, so you'd go to the fourth turning before that, you'd find yourself at 1860, which would be right at the formation of the Civil War. If you were to go 80 years behind that, you would find yourself smack dab in the middle of a very glorious fight with some redcoats called the British at the Revolutionary War. A thereabouts number, it's kind of 80, it could be 83. It's no, if you got in my time machine, you would go from a battlefield to a battlefield to a battlefield. Locations would change, but that's what would be occurring. Also, if you brought with you on the original trip Continental dollars, I'd be like, what do you got with the Continental dollars? And if you brought yourself British pounds, I'd be like, what are you doing with the British pounds? And if you brought yourself American dollars, I'd be like, bro, what are you doing with American dollars? That was last turning. After all these events, we redefine what money is. We redefine what the American dream is. We redefine what the role of government is. We redefine what the family role is. We redefine all these definitions. And so if you look about the world today and you're like, there's a lot of crazy going on. Well, it's because we're at the end of the cycle. And this is expected. The decade from 2020 to 2030, this is what's up. I mean, what you're hoping that doesn't occur, but 12 of the last 15 times, because if you go back 80 years every 5, do it for 500 years, you'll find yourself 12 out of 15 times, you'll find yourself smack dab in the middle of a shooting war on a battlefield. The thought for this is that there's nothing that unites a populace, a people, get together than a common enemy. Right? If the enemy is ourselves, well, it's either got to be north and south, right? Or it's got to be red states versus blue states. It's got to be white people versus black people. Or it can be Americans versus Chinese. It doesn't really matter, but it helps to take a bunch of people and unite them against a common enemy or a vision for the future. Post winning these events, you then get to write the rules because the victors write the rules. America actually started with genocide. That's how we got our country going. There were Native Americans here. We wiped them out, raped the rest. They don't teach you that in 8th grade, but that's what happened. You wiped them out, and they raped the rest. But that's how every culture's always gone, all the way past, way before the Romans. That's how the Romans got what they got, 2 boys, 2 brothers, didn't have any land, they went out, they started ripping, And then they got lofty, they got fancy. Then they started paying people to sit at home in the Colosseums to watch and be entertained, kind of like universal passive income or whatever it is. And then, Rome fell. And people say Rome wasn't built in a day. No, but it collapsed in one. So at the end of these events, we rewrite the rules, right? And in 1944, we had the Bretten Woods Agreement, which is actually in New Hampshire. And that 600 delegates from all around the world attended this thing. The Rothschilds were there. J.P. Morgan was there. You've got Congress. Parts of Congress were there. You had your people there. And that's where the IMF was formed. That was the International Monetary Fund. And the IMF is actually the how we wrap up the current fourth turning. We created the IMF for the purpose of turning the Federal Reserve, the American Federal Reserve, merging that into the IMF when we reach the next 80-year cycle. People have known for many years that life comes in seasons, life comes in cycles. There's a couple ways to look at time. One is linear, and then the other one is cycles. And when you put the linear with the cycles on top of each other, you really get a clear picture of what's going on. So that brings us to today, where the social contracts that we created in 1944, which was pretty much like this. Hey, worlds, so we kick some ass in World War II. Everybody agree? Everybody agree. We'll whoop some ass. Agree. We're going to use $1. Screw the British pound. Appreciate you helping us, but we're not using the British pound because, we whooped that ass 2 turnings ago, but we were still using the British pound as a world reserve currency. But here's the deal. We're not the little baby, Revolutionary War soldiers anymore. We're not the Civil War people with our own beef anymore. Now we're a superpower. It's 1944. We are a superpower. And we would like the dollar to become the world reserve currency. And the world said yes, because the dollar was as good as gold, because the dollar was backed up by gold. Well, in 1913, we created the Federal Reserve. So we now had a gold currency, but it was paper, but it was backed by gold. And we created the Federal Reserve to keep the gold in the reserve. So the Federal Reserve certain privileges. And so at the same time, we decided to come up with income tax. And we kind of needed income tax because in 1913, we were approaching the fourth turning. And it was kind of like, hey, we need to, take a little bit more from the citizens here, which is kind of a good thing because clearly we kind of needed it when we got to World War II. But the problem was they didn't really know what to do with that money, and they created the Great Depression. And there's many reasons why the Great Depression happened. But the Great Depression happened. And people are like, normally that's kind of what happened. If you go back to the Civil War, you go back to the Revolutionary War, there's this economic collapse, then there's war. You get to 2020 and they got the whole economy shut down. You're like, this has never happened before. Even the Revolutionary War times, there was no hey, don't go to your farm because social distancing. They were like, we're men. What are you talking about? Nowadays, you got no men. You got baristas over at Starbucks with their beards and shit. No men left. All things in human relationships, we start out in 1944 and we're like, we're going to be on this gold standard. The world's like, that's awesome. That works for us. We'll do international contracts of trade in dollars. That means if I'm trading this good from that country to that country, and we use 2 different currencies, we'll use a medium of exchange called the dollar, and we'll denominate the terms in the dollar. So if you fast forward to today, we've taken the dollar off the gold standard, which has allowed us to issue more of them. We've thrown a bunch of debt throughout the entire global system because that's how it's got to go. If you owe somebody X amount of millions in dollars and you're in pesos and they're in pounds or yen, you somehow need the dollar. And what we've done at the Federal Reserve is we've restricted the amount of dollars in the system on an international standard so that the dollar is rising in value. So we're playing this crazy Ponzi scheme right now. It's incredible. But that brings us to the end of the cycle because the whole world is basically waking up to this going, wait a second, we're disadvantaged. And the conversation at this point moving forward is, should we have a one world currency? Should we even have fiat currency in general? Because it's a pain in the butt to print it, to track it. They estimate that $2 to $3 trillion of illegal drug business was done in US dollars last year. So should we have cash at all? Wait a second, there's the coronavirus. And it's not even sanitary to have cash anymore. We need to have digital cash. Well, we already have digital cash, but we don't have an official digital cash. So these type of things are up for debate. And then you've got China and you've got Russia. These are the only 3 countries that matter: America, China, and Russia. Nobody else matters because nobody else is a legitimate superpower. I'm optimistic that this can totally be done peacefully, but history doesn't support it. But we've got a rising power in China, and they're communist. And then we've got a holding on or a world contender. We're kind of the heavyweight champion of the world, America. We've turned into a socialist nation where it kind of sort of works for us, right? It keeps the lights on. It's not in our best interest long term, but well, you got to send checks to Delta so that you guys have airplanes to ride on, because we've lost the fact that, well, if those airplanes go through a bankruptcy sale, they'll be cheaper and new entrepreneurs will put better seats in them and they'll fly them more efficiently somehow or another. Like, that's how capitalism works. But we've moved to a socialist. And then you've got Russia, and they're kind of like the unknown contender in the room, because Putin is Russia. Nobody likes it, but Putin's Russia. But it works for them. Like, they collapsed early, and that was 40 years ago. So they're at that spot as we approach the fourth turning of strength. Arguably, Russia might have the most strength. China has the most production. And then the U.S., we have financial standing. So these three things now have to be shifted, because those who have the production means, like the U.S. in 1944, we were the global manufacturing center of the planet. Obviously, the reserve currency is going to be done in our dollars, because aluminum, steel, gold, oil, etc. Why wouldn't you denominate it in U.S. dollars? Because we're doing the most business. China's kind of doing the most business now. Russia's wanting to do a lot of business. They're holding a lot of the commodities. And so all this is up for sale, or up for negotiation, I should say. And then on an individual level, we've reached that point in the cycle where the old social contracts are no longer working. Right? So you get like Black Lives Matter, and you get like, yo, we're going to fight for our position, which is a very super leftist position. And then you've got your like rise in national populism, which is like your Trumpers, right? And they're like, hell yeah, protect America, don't do foreign trade, spend money, use debt. And so that doesn't end well either. And then you've got Russia, who's actually the gangster in the room, who's just sitting there quiet like, yeah, so I'm sitting on the most gold and I got no national debt. China got a lot of national debt. America has a lot of national debt. America owes a lot of that national debt to China, which changes the dynamics. And you got Russia. Typically what happens is two gang up on one, and they agree on who's going to be the new world's reserve currency. It won't be the dollar, or it won't be the dollar in the current form. At the same time, we redo, what does school mean? What does the family unit mean? Multi-generational housing. You guys have heard me talk about it on this channel. It's coming. It's already here. So you got a bunch of kids out there with student loans. Does higher education and a 4-year college degree matter anymore? I would say absolutely not. And so you're at this point where all of these things are changing. Do 20-year-olds spend their time in college and then get a job inside of a big city? Or do they get a van and go do van life and go have a little business and sell coffee out in the mountains of Wyoming? Right? And so all of these things are completely up for grabs, and the way that the generations play a role in it is huge. You've got your baby boomers, which is your leadership, and then you've got your millennials, and then you've got this generation right now that's being born, and they don't even have a name. And these kids will be born into very tough times, because whatever comes between here and 25 is not going to be pleasant. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a grind. In Yellowstone, running some Shopify sites. So you've basically got your baby boomers, your Gen X, your millennials, and then your new generation that doesn't even have a name yet, and they have yet to form their opinions on the world. And this young generation will see their old world, and they'll have no knowledge of the old world. This is the fourth turning. They have never met a actual World War II vet, woman, male, someone that was around in the air. They've never actually met him. There's no transfer of knowledge. And because there's no transfer of knowledge, or no effective transfer of knowledge, because not a lot of 20-year-olds are listening to some 80-year-olds, and they need to be, but not a lot of them are. This is why I say on this channel, get on YouTube. It's freaking free. Pay for it. It's $10 a month, no commercials. And then you can click your phone off, put it in your pocket, and listen to videos all day for $10 a month. It's a deal. Why would you go to college and spend 20 grand a year? $10 a month on YouTube. It's a no-brainer. And so contracts, they go away, right? The parents from 1954 that are sitting there going, hey, go to school, good school, get a good job. College is cheap to go to because you could work and go to college. Get a job with a pension. Have 2-3 kids, get married, 2-3 kids, and a golden retriever and a white picket fence. And that was the American dream back then. That's what, when you're sitting in Germany in 1943, you're sitting there going, shit, I can't wait to get back, get a freaking dog and a house, right? Like, that's what you're thinking. And that's what you go and do. But that next generation that comes up, well, they create the hippies because they're like, times are good, man. I mean, America's booming. 1950s is great. A lot of structure at home. Dinner's at 5 o'clock. Mom's got things tight, right? Well, the family dynamics have since changed. Everything's changed. And the last thing to change will be the financial system, because we've used the exact same financial system with a few edits, some digital currency now. But we've used the same thing since 1944. Financial system's the last thing to change. Before that, you have to go and you have to destroy the old social contracts, the old dreams, the old ideals. So you can have these conversations, /arguments, /battles, /wars, /friction, and you can slam out your where do we go from here? And at the end of the fourth turning, you get to everybody agrees. There are new social norms, and then you restart the long-term debt cycle, which will go for another 80 years or so, and you restart the business cycles and you restart all that. But between 2020 and 2030, more likely 2020, 2025, you have the unraveling of all the old social contracts. So that guy that went out and got a pension, he's about to learn that pension wasn't worth shit. Doesn't think it right now, but he's about to learn. And you know that because the pension funds, you go look them up, they're only about 16% funded for their current liabilities. And the baby boomers, that big old generation, that big huge one, World War generation baby boomers is going to retire. They're going to put a huge strain on the pension system, and they're going to break it. They're going to freaking break it. And they're going to break the financial system while at the same time. And then the world is going to look at it and go, yeah, so what are we going to do about this? And now we have to figure out, okay, well, we could do government fiat, digital currency. A couple people are like, Bitcoin's going to run the world. And I would say that is a total possibility if you kill off the governments, which is eligible. This is like a purge event. If you choose to get 1,000 good men in each nation and go kill off your government, that is a possibility. It's unlikely. So more likely we'll end up with a new government money, and that government money will solve the problems of the old money. So it won't be cash, it'll be trackable. Taxes is a big problem, big burden we have in America now. It'll all be automatic, it'll all be digital, and they'll have complete control over you. And they need to expand or contract the business cycle, they'll just do it through cryptocurrency. Anytime they need to adjust interest rates, they'll just be able to do it through cryptocurrency. And then eventually that cycle will break and it'll restart a new cycle. And all these things are up for grabs. Personally, I have my own opinion on what makes the best financial cycle for human beings, and that is typically a separation of government and money. Could this fourth turning be about that separation? Very possible. If that's the case, it will be extremely bloody, like bloody beyond belief. Like Hollywood's got nothing on how bloody that would be. No government in the history of the world is ever going to allow their monetary system to be hijacked by the people. Don't think for 1 minute that the government's going to allow their own people to actually have control of their own money. That ain't going to work. The best slave is a slave that doesn't know he's a slave. The reason for that is even in 1944, when we became the world's reserve currency and it was backed by gold, American citizens weren't allowed to own gold. So why would you need to own gold, bro? You got the dollar. It's as good as gold. We got it in Fort Knox. Trust me, we got your gold. But don't worry about it. Trade your paper. It's easier. And then what occurs is you have that hard money. You have to restart the system with hard money. It's fact. Okay, you need something real. After a war event, no one trusts anything or anyone. Financial institutions and trust in financial institutions and public institutions and all institutions goes basically to zero. Like, does anyone actually trust the judicial system with Jeffrey Epstein? Not a single person in America, not one, is like, yeah, I'm good with that. Does anyone actually trust the September 11th events? Couple people are like, hell yeah, everything George Bush said was real. Okay, let's go back to Kennedy. Do people think that Kennedy was shot by a Russian? Does anybody believe that? Everybody's like, no, man, of course not. Of course not. And then you're like, well, what about Russiagate and stuff? And you're like, dude, all that's, come on. And like CNN and whatnot, like, dude, they're not going to be a news organization past the boomer generation, right? Like past the baby boomers, and they're probably going to lose even that generation. All the way down to the micro level, like all the way down to family court in your own personal town. You're like, no, that shit's not working. Like that's not how family units are working these days. That's just not how things are working. Things are changing. Things are going to get better. We're going to move forward, but we're going to move through a really weird and kind of cool event. It's a once in a lifetime event. It's a century event, and like, we're going to see it, and it's going to be freaking sweet, and we're going to be able to change how shit works, but it's going to be some hard times, but things are going to be different moving on, and you have to look at how are things going to be different moving on. Well, like what started 80 years ago or has occurred in this last cycle. It's like you're going to get a lot more feminine ideas into culture at the global stage and the local stage, which will be something that wasn't even a consideration last time we did a Bretten Woods deal. Like, it wasn't even on the table. Like, so that's good and bad. Like, that shit, we'll see where that leads us, right? And there's a lot of things that are going to change up. But the idea that America is going to be the manufacturing capital, or it's going to be the finance capital, isn't one of the possibilities, unless we win. And that's all costs, and that's not smart. It's stupid, but it's probably what's going to happen.